are you personally opposed to Measure 14 and 114, and why?
Okay. I was opposed to Measure 114, and there was a couple of different reasons why. The first reason is that it's not the solution that everyone's looking for to try and prevent and overcome firearm violence. The second reason that I was opposed to Measure 114 is we have scarce law enforcement resources already. So to be put in a position where we're mandated to divert funds to other law enforcement resources to accomplish what would be needed after 114 passed, it's a heavy lift. It will take a long time, and whenever you invest in something, something's got to give. So my fear with that is we have increased emergencies that we need to be responding to in the community, and I have a worry that those diverted law enforcement resources will have an effect on response to those emergencies.
Yeah, absolutely. Make sure this is still recording. Makes me nervous.
Yeah, and I give you longer sound bites, Morgan, because I know you do the more in-depth stories, so
Yeah.
sorry if I'm not pausing
that'll be
and
okay.
giving you more room to...
Yeah, we do like to post full interviews, so
Okay.
you can speak for as long as you want. And then you brought up funding, one specific thing. I meant to ask the Crook County Sheriff this, but how do you know that it's going to be local police funding this? Does it say that in Measure 114, or will the legislature have to figure out how funding is diverted to local police?
When the Oregon State Sheriff's Association took a look at this, and they were part of the work group before Measure 114, it was viewed that the fee for the permit to purchase of the firearm would not cover the amount that would need to be invested to get those permits. So that's where you hear the discussion about the lack of funding, that it won't fully cover the cost.
Right. I guess my question, and I'm like personally curious about this, is where does it say that local police will have to put up the money? I mean, that's a lot of fake sales, you know?
Right. It's not specific about it, Morgan. And oftentimes you'll have ballot measures that come into play that either have unfunded mandates behind them, or they just don't have clear language, which makes them difficult to enforce as well. When I took a look at Measure 114, and I'm just trying to estimate how many of our community members will want to have a permit to purchase of a firearm, it's hard to put an exact number on it, because just a month and a half ago you had a 3,000 person waiting list for a firearm over a few days. Now I think the Oregon State Police has said there's a 27,000 person waiting list. So we don't know how many people will want this permit to purchase, and we don't know how Measure 114 affects that desire or want to have it, other than it's obviously increased because you have a backload of background checks to do. So when I looked at it, my initial estimate is we will need 2 or 3 full-time employees to process these permits to purchase, and that's just to get started. That may not even be enough resource bandwidth to accommodate the number of folks that are going to want a permit to purchase.
Yeah, and do the sheriffs of Oregon expect any kind of state funding from this, or any kind of relief once the legislature does get a hold of it, which may not be for years now, once they do get a hold of it, if at all, are the Oregon sheriffs expecting some kind of state funding to help?
I have never come to expect any funding out of that. That's not to say that after some discussions have been had and that ballot measure has been looked at, that's not to say the state wouldn't step forward with some funding, but right now, as it stands now, the funding comes from the fee, and anything that is above and beyond that would fall with local agencies.
Yeah, that's similar to what the Cook County Sheriff said as well. What is the solution then, if not gun control?
And the reason I bring that up is I saw a news piece that had mentioned the murderer in the Safeway shopping forum incident locally. Ballot Measure 114 would not have prevented that individual from getting firearms. The other reason I bring it up is that those who don't follow the law usually don't get firearms in a lawful manner. So what you have is you have a law-abiding citizen who is a good, upstanding citizen who is going to follow this law and go through these procedures and hoops to get the permit to purchase. But you will still have the individuals who break the law, who don't care what the law is, getting firearms by illegal means. Leslie Newstetter, who oversees a nonprofit, Prevent Mass Shootings Now, which we're very supportive of her nonprofit. She's also a part-time teammate of ours here at the Sheriff's Office as a behavioral health specialist. She cites that these individuals who have significant mental health challenges are often suicidal before they're homicidal. And so my point is we've got to get this training and this information out to our community members, because if they see something that causes them alarm, or they see social media posts, or they hear conversations, and they have concerns about an individual who's about to commit a mass violence act or a mass murder act, we want them to bring that information forward. What I think we have as a society is you have a lot of people that are fearful to bring that information forward because they've seen how it can ruin someone's life. In today's day and age, as it plays out in mass media markets across the nation, it doesn't really appear people are allowed to make mistakes anymore, or allowed to have shortcomings and an opportunity to get better. So when I look at supporting Prevent Mass Shootings Now, we want to have this training platform where we train and we share information with our community members and we show them the signs. And then we also want to find a way where they can report these things, not through law enforcement, because it's been said they don't feel comfortable reporting those things through law enforcement, but an alternate way to report those things, because we have local threat assessment teams in place, and they are made up of a number of individuals and a number of law enforcement agencies who can sit down and debrief these things and see what the threat is and see what quick actionable items there are, so that we can try and prevent as many of these things from happening that we can. At the end of the day, we're all human beings, and we deal with the human element of things. And so we will never be able to say there will never be another mass violence incident, no matter how hard you try, no matter how much legislation you have. But what we can do is try and be resourceful and proactive and bring programs to the forefront who can have an effect on the number of incidents that happen.
Yeah, absolutely, great. Let's see.
And just for the camera, we have plans to host 4 of the Stop Mass Shootings Now trainings. Leslie is going to come and put those trainings on for our community members, so those are going to be coming up in the future. And we are also working on a reporting line and having discussions about the best way to report that information. At the end of the day, I would always encourage everyone to please report that information to our office or local law enforcement. We have been able to mitigate potentially violent situations because of information we receive, and then we can get on that right away and prevent that from happening.
Yeah, great. If 114 is eventually approved, like I said, we don't know what the timeline is at this point. We talked to a constitutional law professor that said it could be up to 3 to 4 years, 5, 6, like it'll be stuck in the court system. If it is eventually approved, would you enforce it?
If ballot measure 114 is eventually approved, it's not going to be a priority for enforcement for this office. I mentioned before, we have a scarce amount of law enforcement resources. We are down 23 deputy sheriff positions right now. Half of those are in our corrections division, half in our patrol division. We are fortunate that we work with great people here at the sheriff's office who are willing to step up and fill some of those shifts. But law enforcement hasn't been an attractive profession the last few years. And so we're doing the best we can, much like any other business in the state. But we're having trouble finding We're having trouble and difficulty finding individuals to fill different positions within our office. So that's what makes it a low priority for us. The second thing is it's not a very well written law. There's a lot of exemptions for people that have already owned these 10-round magazines. And to me, when you try to investigate that, I know the law mentions they have to prove they've had it. To me, that kind of goes against the whole criminal justice system and what it's based on. You're innocent until proven guilty. So there's a lot of questions that need to be answered there. And from my standpoint, we have a lot of emergencies and different law enforcement priority calls that we need to be dealing with. So we respond to every call for service. We'll go, we'll investigate it, and we'll have discussions, but it's not going to be a priority for enforcement for our office.
Yeah, and with that, the law professor said that some portions of 114 might be considered constitutional while others might not be. Are you more willing to prioritize a permit to purchase over the magazine ban, or the magazine ban over the permit to purchase, or is it Measure 114 as a whole?
No, Morgan, as a matter of fact, we're already taking steps together with the State Sheriff's Association, Oregon Association of Chiefs of Police, and our great partners at the Oregon State Police to get a system in place so that we can issue those permits to purchase, because I believe there's going to be a high demand for those permits. They're very similar to the concealed handgun licenses that we issue. So our concern right now is just bandwidth and the number of resources that we have. Right now, currently, our concealed handgun license program has been inundated with new applicants. And so the earliest appointment we have is in May of this year. That's not acceptable to me. We're trying to do what we can and think outside the box so that we can speed those processes up so that individuals can get these permits in a timely manner.
Yeah, and are you guys still preparing for December 8th as the date it will go into effect, or are you waiting for the courts to kind of figure out? I mean, is December 8th looking like it's the date still?
December 8th is the day unless something happens in a courtroom on December 2nd. We'll wait and see. We're still going to prepare for it because I think that's what we need to do to be responsible and provide the service to our community members. So we are preparing for it. Once we see what gets determined in court on the 2nd, that might help us slow down a little bit and be able to digest it a little bit more. But you mentioned that, and it makes me wish that the state of Oregon would find some way to make sure the framework is in place before some of these ballot measures come out. A lot of times these ballot measures get approved and they go into effect and there's no framework or resources that can support them. One of the examples I'd use is Measure 110. Measure 110 went into effect and the state money to go to health assessment centers didn't roll out for 2 years and maybe still hasn't rolled out. So it would be better to have the framework and all of these plans in place before a ballot measure goes into effect.
Yeah, I want to make sure it's still recording. Still makes me nervous. Great. And then you've been speaking as the sheriff. I now want to shift over to president of the Oregon State Sheriff's Association. Do you represent every sheriff in Oregon with your stance or the OSSA's stance on Measure 114?
I will never claim to represent every sheriff in the state of Oregon. Sheriffs are unique individuals, and she or he represents their county and their community members, and they each have a unique set of circumstances that they serve. They'll make their own decisions. They'll make their own statements on Measure 114. I represent the Oregon State Sheriff's Association, currently serving as the president. And so our message has been focused and concerned about the resource suck that ballot Measure 114 will bring at a time when we're seeing crime and emergencies rise in our communities.
Great. Would you say it's the stance of OSSA as a whole to be against, sorry, there's somebody looking at, she left now, to be against Measure 114?
The Oregon State Sheriff's Association was opposed to ballot Measure 114. We still have concerns about the constitutionality of ballot Measure 114, and so we'll look to see how it plays out in court. But we still feel that it's a flawed ballot measure, and we will support those court efforts so that we can have an outcome, and that will better guide us toward the future.
do you plan on joining a lawsuit, or do you plan on supporting a lawsuit against Measure 114?
I know there are specific sheriffs in the state who have joined lawsuits. From the Oregon State Sheriff's Association viewpoint, we are supporting that ballot measure 114 goes to court. I'll let those individual sheriffs speak on how they feel about their individual communities. But right now, the Oregon State Sheriff's Association is focused on what's the best way to provide framework for the implementation of ballot measure 114, should it stand the way it is.
Great. And do you plan on you yourself entering into any kind of lawsuit against measure 114?
I have not decided right now. I'm in a unique position because not only do I serve this community, I serve the Oregon State Sheriffs as their president. I'm well aware of those two different roles, so right now I'm going to reserve thought on that, and I'll make a decision in the future.